Well, thank you for joining us for this evening's event. My name is Rachel, and I'm one of the event's hosts here at Powell's Books in Portland, Oregon. Before we begin, I wanted to encourage you to check out our lineup of upcoming virtual events by visiting our website at powells.com or by following us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Tonight, we're so excited to welcome Stephen Graham Jones and Jeremy Robert Johnson. Stephen Graham Jones is a recipient of an NEA Fellowship, the Texas Institute of Writers Award for Fiction, the Independent Publishers Award for Multicultural Fiction, a Bram Stoker Award, 4 This Is Horror Awards, and has been a finalist for the Shirley Jackson Award and the World Fantasy Award. By day, he is the Vanna Baldwin Professor of English at the University of Colorado Boulder. Jones's widely acclaimed new book, The Only Good Indians, follows 4 American Indian men after a disturbing event from their youth puts them in a desperate struggle for their lives. Tracked by an entity bent on revenge, these childhood friends are helpless as the culture and traditions they left behind catch up to them in a violent way. A tale of revenge, cultural identity, and the cost of breaking from tradition, The Only Good Indian seamlessly blends classic horror and a dramatic narrative with sharp social commentary. Jeremy Robert Johnson is the author of the critically acclaimed collection Entropy in Bloom, as well as the breakthrough cult novel Skullcrack City. His fiction has been praised by the Washington Post and Publishers Weekly. Authors such as David Wong, Chuck Palahniuk, and Jack Ketchum, and has appeared internationally in numerous anthologies and magazines. In 2008, he worked with the Mars Volta to tell the story behind the Grammy Award-winning album, The Bedlam and Goliath. In 2017, his short story, When Susurrus Stirs, was adapted for film and won numerous awards, including the Final Frame Grand Prize and Best Short Film at the H.P. Lovecraft Film Festival. Stranger Things meets World War Z in Johnson's new novel, The Loop, a heart-racing conspiracy theory where a lonely young woman teams up with a group of fellow outcasts to survive the night in a town overcome by a science experiment gone wrong. Set in a small tourist town nestled in the hills of Western Oregon, this idyllic locale becomes the epicenter of an epidemic of violence as the teenage children of several executives from the local biotech firm become ill and aggressively murderous. Suddenly, the town is on edge, and Lucy and her friends must do everything it takes just to fight through the night. This evening's event will also include an audience Q&A. Please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen if you'd like to ask a question. And if someone has typed a question that you'd also like to know the answer to, please upvote that particular question by clicking the thumbs up button. And most importantly, please consider supporting Stephen, Jeremy, and Powell's by purchasing a copy of their new books from us. A link to purchase their books will be shared in the chat a couple times this evening. Stephen, Jeremy, it's such a pleasure to welcome you both. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Thanks for having us.
Great to be here.
Yep. Me and Jeremy, before the cameras came on here, we played rock, paper, scissors, which was my first time ever to play rock, paper, scissors in my 48 years. Jeremy showed me how, and he probably cheated somehow, but
I lost.
you wanted me to go first, like the sacrificial goat, man. I was trying to think, when's the last time we saw each other? I know we were at BizarroCon in 2013. Has there been a time since then?
Growing Up Dead in Texas.
Yeah, that was at Powell's.
And that one, yeah.
I thought that okay, I thought that was 2012, but maybe I'm confused. Who knows? It doesn't seem like that long ago because we see each other in the writing world and on social media all the time. You know, it's weird. But I bet our lives have changed radically in the last like 7 years or 8 years, you know, probably.
Yeah.
And it's also cool that we're getting to do this because you're only the second writer that I've got to do an event with whom I share an editor with, Joe Monty at Saga, you know, that's really cool. So we could talk bad about Joe here, but I suspect he's going to listen, you know. I don't know. I don't know. Anyways, the way we're going to do this, all y'all out there, is I'm going to read a little bit of my novel. Jeremy's going to read a little bit of his novel. Well, I'm going to read a little bit of mine aloud. I assume you're going to read yours aloud. We can just watch you read if you want, you know. And then we're going to talk amongst ourselves. And then Rachel's going to come back on and feed us some questions. And we're going to try to answer those questions in a dignified fashion. That's pretty much it, I think. I liked when Rachel introduced me. She said, by day, I'm a professor. It made me feel like writer is my secret identity, you know, like I'm out beating up muggers or something. It's exciting. Anyway, The Only Good Indians, I'll read you a little bit of it. And as for setup, I don't know what number this chapter is. I don't think I numbered the chapters. I think the name of this chapter is Old Indian Tricks. Well, I guess I'll tell you about Only Good Indians. It's 4 dudes are out hunting. They're out after elk one day on the reservation, up the Blackfeet Reservation up in Montana. And they kind of make a decision they probably shouldn't have made and walk away from that day. But 10 years later, something remembers that day and is coming for them pretty hard. And in the middle of all that, there's a lot of basketball. And I'm going to read y'all a basketball piece of it because I don't get to read the basketball piece. Well, I say the basketball piece. There's basketball all through this, but this is one of the basketball pieces, anyways. The main character here, or the character here, is Denora, which she gets her name. Her name was supposed to be Deborah, but her father was a few beers into the day when he did her birth certificate, and he screwed up and named her Denora. You know, that happens. Let's see. That's all. Oh, there's a character in here, Trace. You'll hear the name Trace. That's Denora's big sister. I think that's all I need to know. Let me go into my secret identity here. All right. It's about form, yes. Coach is right about that. Everybody knows that. But what Denora's big sister taught her, forwarding and rewinding through hours of tape, is that it's also about using the exact same form every single time you step up to the stripe. And that form, that ritual, it's not just the second and a half or 2 seconds of your free throw either. It starts with how you toe up to the line. For Denora, it's right foot first, right up to the paint, then backing off about a shoelace width because the point will get erased if your feet are illegal. If you're a good shooter, that's not the end of anything, as you usually get a do-over in junior high. But if you missed and one of your tall girls hauled the rebound down, has position to slip it back in for an easy two, then, well, then you've screwed things up, haven't you? So out at the pad of concrete at the back of her family's 2 acres at the edge of town, where her new dad's rigged up some floodlights for summer, where she had to measure out and paint the charity stripe herself, Denora shoots and shoots and shoots. Never mind that she can see her breath in the cold. 86 out of 100, then 79, which gets her breathing hard and mad, then an even 90. Because the scrimmage this week is Saturday night, tomorrow night, and there's no practice the day before a game, so everyone can have fresh legs and be mentally prepared, today is for free throws. They've never been Denora's weak point, but she's also never had a game where she swished every one. So there's room for improvement. Like with Trace, her whole future might come to rest on making 1 point the easy way, with the whole gym thundering and crumbling around her, the floor beneath her shoes trembling, sweat pouring into her eyes. Coach never has them do free throws at the front of practice, but the back. So they'll know what it's like to make themselves have good form when they're exhausted. Just want to fling the ball up there, say a prayer after it. But Denora needs fresh legs for tomorrow, so she's compensating by trying to get a cool 500 shots in before dark, or to get 500 either way, whether she gets to slope down to the house for dinner or ends up shooting right through it again. Toe up to the line with the right foot, back off a touch for safety, then work the left up until it's dead even with the right. Spin the ball back with the lines going from thumb to thumb and dribble twice. Fast and hard with the right hand, using the whole shoulder, elbow straightening out each time. Catch it. Look up to the rim, bend the knees, back straight, ass out, and push up with the front of the thighs. Extend with the right arm. Left hand just there to keep the rock steady. The calves pushing right at the end when the middle finger of that right hand is gripping onto the rubber of the valve hole, imparting the perfect spin. Swish, swish, swish. The machine girl is on automatic. She's locked and loaded, doesn't even need to concentrate anymore. Fouling her in the act of shooting is the same as putting a pair of points up on the scoreboard for her team. Bring it, Denora says, lining up again. The only thing she regrets about basketball that baseball and football and even golf have over it is that those players all get to wear war paint under their eyes. What coach tells them in the locker room before every game is that their war paint is on the inside of their faces. It's in how they hold their faces. It's in how they look the other girls in the eye and don't look away. Dribbling and passing and shooting are just the parts of the game that get recorded in the stats. There's also who wants it worse. To steel herself against the kind of bullshit Indian teams always get hurled at them when the game's close, Denora tries to inoculate herself with what the other side of the gym will be chanting. It's a good day to die. I will fight no more forever. The only good Indian is a dead Indian. Kill the Indian, save the man. Bury the hatchet. Off the reservation. Indian, go home. No Indians or dogs allowed. Her sister heard them all in her day, perverted on spirit ribbons, usually illustrated too. Shoe polished on the windows of buses. The big one was always massacre the Indians. Bring it, Denora says in her head, and drops another through the net. If the only good Indian is a dead one, then she's going to be the worst Indian ever. Thank you. And before I'm going to turn my video off. before Jeremy goes, because the whole time I was reading, I knew that Jeremy was probably doing like doing some jokey thing while I was reading. You know, I don't want him thinking that. So I'll be back right after Jeremy does his thing.
Oh man. Hey y'all. So I'm gonna read a very brief section from The Loop. Just came out a couple weeks ago, and I guess I should say in advance, because I have sometimes forgotten to give this warning. I know there are some folks out there who let their kids attend horror events and are perfectly fine with them seeing and hearing all the regular content of a horror film, but don't always like it when there's sexual content included. So I will say there is a sexual reference here, and I am warning you in advance because I had a parent who felt the same way. My mother let me watch pretty much everything from the age of 5. I was fascinated by horror movies. It was my favorite thing to do. But at the same time, she didn't want some of what she thought was the more lewd sexual content making it through. So she would actually hand censor the dubs of R-rated horror movies for me. So when I was watching, say, Nightmare on Elm Street 3, there's a scene where a nurse exposes herself before she reveals herself to be Freddy Krueger and entraps this kid. And my mom didn't want me seeing the part where she exposed her, natural life-giving breast, but she was fine with all the rest of the murder story. So when she dubbed it to the second VHS tape, she actually recorded some television over the top of the nudity scene. And what she dubbed in was, I will never forget this, it's a brief outtake from Ronald Reagan's State of the Union address. So a woman's about to disrobe, it jumps to Ronald Reagan delivering part of his State of the Union. Boom, it jumps back. Freddy's killing a guy in a hospital. So if you don't want any sexual content, there is just one brief reference in here. If you're fine with that, then here we go. Oh, it's also very violent. So there's that too. To preface this, the main character in The Loop is a young woman named Lucy. She is an adoptee originally from Peru. She is living in a very small, very white town in Central Oregon, where she is encountering a lot of cultural difficulties and class-based difficulties. And as it begins, she has been separated from her best friend, Bucket Marwani, who is from Pakistan. And she is kind of sitting alone in class when she notices something going wrong with a fellow student. Lucy was about to laugh until she saw the way Chris's body was moving. Something was wrong with him. Very, very wrong. His narrow frame was slumped, pinning his weight against the metal support tube running from chair to desk. Lucy leaned forward and noticed a thin string of drool hanging from the corner of Chris's mouth. Sweat was beading on his forehead and soaking through his greasy black locks. His left leg was jerking back and forth at the knee while his foot pressed against the tile flooring so hard the sole was scuffing. He's fighting something? Like he's trying to force himself to stay at that desk. Mr. Chambers finally caught on and turned to look at Chris. Mr. Carmichael, what's... And then Chris's neck bent back and he was staring at the ceiling and he yelled, "You promised you'd delete the picture, Jenny. Stop being such a bitch." Patty Dufresne stood bolt upright. "Shut your mouth, Chris. How do you..." Chris kept yelling, "Why am I seeing this? Where am I? I don't want this." And then he fell quiet, but the spasms in his body amplified, causing his desk to rock and lift and clatter against the floor. His head swiveled, eyes wide and panicked as if he were trying to see in the dark. Have his eyes always been so blue? Lucy swore that Chris had hazel eyes, but now they appeared blue and roomy. Lucy wondered how that could be, but the thought was interrupted when his back and knees popped so loudly the sound echoed against the ceiling tiles. Lucy recoiled, imagining how that must feel inside Chris's body, his joints grinding and locking, unable to stop all that shaking. Mr. Chambers was at Chris's side then. "We need to give him room until this passes. The key is to keep him from hurting himself. Megan, run down to the office and tell them to call 911. Then Chambers bent over Chris's thrumming body and rattling desk. "We need to get him as flat and stabilized as we can. Jake and Michael, you get his legs and I'll lift under his shoulders." The teacher said, "Chris, can you hear me? I need to move you." And he laced his hands behind the boy's neck. And that's when Lucy realized she must have fallen asleep in class, because she swore that at that moment she heard something under Chris's hair squeal. And then Mr. Chambers was backing away with a bloody hand, screaming, "What the fuck?" And then Jake, forever dull and cruel and incapable of reading the goddamn room, tried to get in one more joke. He leaned toward the back of the class and said, "Chris is shaking harder than his mom's vibrator." But no one laughed. Even Jake's victory chuckle was cut short because within seconds, Chris had erupted from his desk and was on top of Jake, had him trapped in his seat. And in a series of spasms, Chris managed to raise one hand and plunge his right thumb directly into Jake's left eye. Then, in Lucy's nightmare, she saw Mr. Chambers afraid to move forward, but yelling, "Chris, get off him now or I'll have to report this," as if they were still in a situation where something like the rules of a high school might apply. And Jake began to bleed from the corner of his eye as he unleashed a slaughterhouse squeal and tried to bat Chris away with his arms. And then Chris's eyes rolled back in his head and a flat, even voice fell from his mouth saying, "Override protocol failed. Ops dispatched." Mr. Chambers didn't seem to understand where the voice was coming from because he turned toward the door of the classroom, looking for the people who might be coming to restore order. After a few seconds ticked by, he must have realized that task fell to him because he rushed over to his desk and pulled out a small black canister of pepper spray and said, "You have to stop that now, Chris. Stop or I'll spray you." If Chris heard, he paid it no mind. His thumb pressed farther into Jake's skull. Jake made noises that no one in that room would escape dreaming about. Mr. Chambers stepped towards the boy and sprayed Chris's eyes and then aimed the stream directly into the mouth of the young man. Mr. Chambers gained Chris's attention. Chris untethered from Jake's coiled, screaming body and stood. Blood dripped from his thumb to the tile. The class sat paralyzed, coughing and gagging and trying to breathe fresh air through folded hoodies or sleeves. A crowd had gathered at the door to the classroom, some filming with their phones, some running when they saw Jake's body shaking its way into deep shock. Chris straightened and looked at Mr. Chambers, then at his red, slick hand. "This fixes it. What I did, what you did to me, the signal." His voice started to fade, airway tightening against the pepper spray assault. Chris shook his head from side to side and coughed. He blinked through hideously swollen eyelids. "It's not so bad, Mr. Chambers. They said I would be smarter, but they lied to me. They lied to my mom. But you really helped me after all this time." Then Chris bent forward, his movements finally smooth, and he picked up his pre-calculus book from the floor. He lifted the thick, sharp-cornered book up in the air with one bright red hand. "This is the answer. You gave us the answer." Then Chris Carmichael took 2 swift strides towards the front of the room and swung the textbook down into Mr. Chambers' face. Mr. Chambers lost his legs and ragdolled to the floor, and then Chris was on top of him with the book raised high, and he turned toward the class to speak. "This makes it stop. This is real." He brought the textbook down, using both arms this time. Something crunched. "I could see it all before, too much, but now I'm here." Another swing down. This time the arc of the book splattered the white tile ceiling with tiny red drops. Lucy could swear she saw something pulsing on the back of Chris's neck as his hair flopped forward. "We're going to be okay, you guys." Another swing. Mr. Chambers' hand fish-flopped on the floor, his wedding ring ticking against the tile, his moaning buried beneath the sound of gargled blood. "We're all going to be okay." And then Lucy leaned forward in her desk because her vision had filled with tiny blinking stars, and she fought to stay conscious because there was a murderer in the room. She could barely breathe from the pepper spray, and it was far too late for locks, lights, out of sight. She didn't know what the hell she was supposed to do. Part of her wanted to jump from her desk and restrain Chris or knock him off Mr. Chambers, but everything was moving too fast. She heard men yelling in the hallway. Something rolled into the classroom next to Mr. Chambers' awfully quiet, immobile body, and Chris didn't even stop to acknowledge the purple smoke coming from the object because he was still swinging his book. How can he hold on to the book with so much blood on his hands? Lucy felt oddly guilty for thinking such a thing, but then her thoughts were wiped clear by the smell of the noxious purple smoke and the sudden thunderous sound of close gunfire, and then the sight of Chris's face slumping loose from his head and slapping against his chest. The air was toxic with pepper spray and gunpowder and atomized blood. Screams ran through the room at full surround. Chris's body gave one last tremor and collapsed onto Mr. Chambers. Then the school bell rang. It was the final shock Lucy could bear. Some distant part of her mind thought, "School's out," and slid into static, then nothing. So that's the opening to the loop. There's a little bit before that. Well, oh God. But yeah, that's kind of how it all begins, and nothing bad happens after that. That's pretty much
Wow.
the most awful thing that happens in the book, and then
Yeah.
it's all fairly relaxed. That's the high conflict moment. So I thought I'd start with that.
Yeah, he's lying. Y'all saw how early he was in the book. He was like this far in, and it gets a lot worse. There's brains and guts and everything everywhere. It's like all the different kinds of fun you can list on your fingers. It happens in the next like 300 pages, Thank you, Jeremy. That was good. That was amazing.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. And it was a fun book too, man. The Loop. I know it's being sold as Stranger Things meets World War Z, which is a good description. But when I think about it more as childhood's end via Pontypool. Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
the original comp I went with was Shivers meets Dazed and Confused.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
But marketing felt not enough people had seen Shivers. And it's like mandatory, state mandated to throw Stranger Things on every book right now.
So it is, man. It is.
I warned them. I was like, these kids are not the Stranger Things kids.
You should have done an author photo with you on a bicycle, with a banana seat,
Yeah. So I know we're going into the conversation phase now, and I had as a fan of The Only Good Indians, one of my favorite horror novels, not just of this year, but heading into this decade and of the last. I think it's a fantastic novel. I had a couple nerd questions I wanted to ask as an individual first. So if you're open to that. So there's a scene that involves Gabriel and Cass and a thermos. And that, to me, no spoilers, it's just a description of characters and objects, but it's an all-time heartbreaker for me, that scene. Just like one of those perfect moments in horror that I had to go back and reread a series of sentences to make sure the scene was actually happening, which seldom happens. But there's a number of other moments in the book where these very shocking and sudden acts of violence kind of unfold in like almost a Final Destination kind of way. Not quite Rube Goldberg, but there's a sense of things being set up. There's the vengeful antagonist of the book, the Elkhead woman. She's completely capable of violence, awful violence herself, but she chooses to set up these elaborate traps where her prey is more likely to be killed by other humans. Can you kind of tell me the reasoning behind that decision?
Yeah, I'm doing a slasher, of course. It's a group of people who did wrong, and now a spirit of vengeance is coming for them. To me, a slasher is not that interesting when the slasher is like the Kool-Aid man who bursts through the wall and just beats everybody on the head in the room. That's not that fun. I mean, there's a good a jump at first when that happens, but it doesn't really have any resonance, I don't think. So this spirit of vengeance, in my read of it anyways, is she doesn't just want to kill these people who did her wrong. She wants to take away that which is the most important to them, and she does do that in Final Destination ways. She like knocks over a domino on one side of the room, and like 12 minutes later in the different room a domino falls and somebody dies, and it's not at her hand generally. She hates these people too much to just cut their head off with a machete. She wants to do them real and true violence, and I think real and true violence is making somebody do violence to themselves, which really, did you ever watch Sledgehammer? Did you watch the old series? Sledgehammer?
Yep.
You know how Sledgehammer, he kept getting in trouble for police brutality, and so he would pull his gun and make his perps beat themselves up, that's probably where that idea comes from. It
was a pretty 80s show.
It was terrible and wonderful, but yeah, it was mostly terrible, I think. Hey, one question I've been wanting to ask you for a long time. You and me are like two of the only 3-name writers out there. At what point in your career did you decide to be a 3-name person?
It was I was working at the bank, and back then, before they kind of changed the laws, you were allowed to look up your own account. So I'd do like an inquiry when I wanted to check and see if I got my bank deposit. They didn't have online banking yet, but I was at work, so I could check. And I did a search for Jeremy Johnson, and it returned 590 Jeremy Johnsons in the state at that bank. And I realized like a lot of parents that had kids in the late 70s were big fans of Jeremiah Johnson or something. Something had kicked off a mass Jeremy Johnson production event. And I knew I needed to be differentiated. So I was like, well, I could do, bust out a Dean R. Koontz. And then if I sell enough books, I can drop the R.
Yeah.
But now there's other authors named Jeremy Johnson too. So it's, I'm sticking with the full Robert. But yeah, you do get that, the serial killer thing. It's got the 3-name effect.
But also it gives you like initials. You can be known as JRJ, which is, I think that travels pretty well.
It's actually super convenient, and it's a palindrome. So I tried to go into that right away.
Yeah, for sure. About this book specifically now, Lucy has been adopted out of Peru. How did you it's a nervy move to write a woman from Peru. I'm not sure I have the nerve to do it, because I would be afraid I would just jack everything up for the rest of time, but you did it as near as I can tell wonderfully, cleanly, really, really well. How did you work up the nerve, and what did you do to pull her off?
It was a weird, so I did recognize the challenges inherent in that. I knew I was diving into the deep end on that. But the reason she came to me in the first place is I had written a couple of different projects, and I had writer's block after I wrote Sleep of Judges and In the River. They were both, one was about my house getting burglarized, and others about the fear of the loss of my child. So I was so emotionally spent at the end of writing those stories, I had nothing left for this next novel that I was literally supposed to begin the next weekend. I was, pretty blocked. And my wife bought me a gift certificate to a sensory deprivation tank. And so I went in there, and she said, go meditate on the novel and just see if something comes to you. And so I was in there, and I'd had my morning coffee, which I said not to do. And so I mostly just listened to my heartbeat for about 45 minutes. And all of a sudden, I did have this transcendental thing where I floated up out of my body, and I saw these swirling green stars around me, and my consciousness, it was like an astral projection thing. And I was like, oh, this must mean something. And then the green stars started swirling, and they coalesced, and they formed a name, and it just said Lucia. And so I went home, and I said, I have to tell this woman Lucia's story, and I knew it was a coming of age story. And so I said, who is Lucia? Where does she come from? And what would make her life in this small town as challenging as possible? What is it like when you're in one of these little places and you're different than everyone else? And so that was kind of the primary inspiration. It was like, I wasn't allowed to tell a vision no, but then also just, consulting with friends, and, actually knowing people from Peru and Brazil and Colombia, and consulting with them and making sure I was getting things right, not trying to put any thoughts in her mind, in particular with regards to race and class and that sense of otherness, that wasn't in some way vetted by people who had lived those experiences. So it was a challenge, and hopefully I did well enough. People are saying they appreciate that sense of representation, and that they really love Lucy. So fingers
they
crossed
love
I got
Lucy.
it right,
They love Lucy.
yeah.
I like the idea of a sleep deprivation tank, but I think this
That takes a while.
The keyboard is a sleep deprivation tank, right? And that day you did the sleep deprivation tank, did you make any jokes about reverting to monkey form?
I did actually. I told I had shown my wife Altered States years before, and I was like, if it goes like that, I'm not going to come back. I'm going to be over at the zoo, eating whatever the easiest prey is. So sorry. And she kind of remembered the movie, sort of got it, but
Oh, that
but that's what I was hoping for going in. But I'll take a vision that set off a novel's cool enough.
That's plenty. But Altered States was such a formative movie for me. That movie rewired my brain for the rest. I'm still in that rewired place, I feel like.
It's Patty Chayefsky too, the guy that did Marty and Network and all that. Just a brilliant writer. But I didn't know that until later. And you go back and listen to all that overlapping dialogue and how crazy that film is, and what an impressive screenwriter.
Man, it is. I've got
I have another nerd question.
Oh, go for it, man. Yeah.
This one. Okay. So there's a basketball game in the novel, which plays a far more central and kind of epic role than most basketball games and horror novels would be expected to play, which is part of what it's one of those idiosyncrasies to the book that I love. That sense, it feels like a really free book in the way it jumps from narrative points, in the way the story is told. the elk head woman being inserted in as you, which kind of makes the reader almost complicit in her revenge. All those elements are pretty special, but this is just a nerd thing. At the height of the game, one of the characters scores 19 points before the ultimate conflict begins. I had to ask Paul Tremblay a similar question after the number 19 appeared in his novel Survivor Song. Is there any symbolic reason that the score stops at 19? And is it in any way related to the Dark Tower universe?
You know, I never thought King was going to finish Dark Tower, so I never read it. So it doesn't relate to Dark Tower. You know, now he finished it like with more volumes than you thought he was going to do even. There's an old Steely Dan song. Oh, Hey 19. I bet it comes from Hey 19, if anything. But I mean, just like mechanically, it comes from, if I brought them up to 20, then I would never forgive them for not finishing that game. You know, because you can't get that close to 21 and not finish the game. You know, but I thought 19 was close enough to be a threat, but far enough not to feel like a cheat if I didn't deliver it. You know, if that makes sense. Yeah.
That makes absolute sense.
Yeah, and also I miss basketball so much. You can probably tell reading this book. I had to give up basketball because I kept having knee and ankle and all kinds of surgeries from it, because I can't play with people in my age group. I always play with 22-year-olds, you know. But I miss basketball so much. But I was so lucky that I was able to play basketball in this book. I probably won't be able to again for a lot of years because I don't want to be known as the basketball dude. I mean, I do want to be known like that, but I don't think I could carry that very well, you know.
No, it was one of those, like, it was like reading Tom Jones doing, you know, boxing. It was one of those things where it was so visceral, and you could tell that your understanding of the mechanics of basketball and what makes basketball feel glorious was so implicit in the way you're doing the work that it was kind of joyous, and it puts you inside of Denora and her you know, her physical challenge that she's facing when she's finally stepping up to this ultimate you know, player. Yeah. So I thought it was unexpected but great, you know.
Thank you very much. You know, I'll ask you a question. I forget where I read this, if this is in the acknowledgments of your book or if I read it. I think this was in an interview you did. You talked about checking into a motel room a few times to push through parts of this novel, and I've never done that. And I'm always like, I hear a lot of people like Wolf Christopher Bear used to do that too, and Douglas Adams used to do that, you know, or his publisher would make him do that, you know, because he would never turn stuff in. But what's that like, just to live in the world of your novel so completely for like 48 hours at a time or something? What does it do to you?
I highly recommend it. I think it was Craig Clevenger. I saw him talking about doing that too, and he would set up coffee ice cream as a push prize at the end of finishing a large section of the book. So I tried that the first time I did it too. Just give yourself a reason to sit there for 16 hours straight typing. When I was in my 20s, I used to do it to the point of falling asleep at the keyboard. I would try to go for 72 hours straight. But now I don't do that. It's fascinating to be in the mode of your work for that long, because I think you get the emotional through line of the work. It stays with you. You're not coming back to it and rereading and re-editing and saying, what was happening in the story? You're so immersed in the story that I think you can take out large swaths of it and have it feel really emotionally true and have that sense of a drive there. The last couple of times I did it, my in-laws actually let me stay in a camp trailer of theirs because the hotels were getting expensive. And so this was complete isolation in a camp trailer. And one time I went in for 72 hours and emerged to a snowstorm that had full, 3-foot drifts, and I had to chain up my truck to get out of there.
Wow.
But yeah, just working with zero interruption, sitting there for that long is I highly recommend it. It's awful for your body.
Yeah.
And your sense of the world, you completely lose time, but it's pretty fun, and it is a great way to plow through when you especially need to finish a novel and you want to see that final arc through. It's a pretty exciting way to close it out.
Yeah, it must be. And from the outside, I would imagine it's like stepping into a dream space or something, like where the rules don't hold. Yeah. I used to do the 3-day novel contest where I'd try to stay awake for 72 hours as well, and I would wake up with 14 pages of the letter N, which doesn't really, it's not narratively propelling,
It's experimental.
Yeah. Oh man. One question I'll ask you, not about this book, just about life in general, is I guess it's about my life in general specifically, why can't I get as good at Galaga as you are? And I've got a Galaga machine. I don't understand why I can't get better. I tap out at about 250,000 points and I just panic and get in a corner and everything blows me up. You know, is there a secret? Do I need to have nerves of steel or fingers of lightning? What's going on? Why are you so much better at Galaga than I am? But
You've got the pattern, and you've got the multiple shift grab down way better than me. It's maybe it's a fast twitch nerve thing. I'm pretty sure you're in the lead now based on some of the stuff I saw you post across the last couple of years. I got a micro Galaga. It was actually a party favor at a kid's birthday party that my son got, and I ended up playing it more than him. And I was trying to get the rhythm back, but it's not the same as a full size joystick.
yeah.
No, I saw somebody winning the National Galaga tournaments in a video game documentary recently, and they said it was purely about pattern memorization for them.
Yeah.
They had it memorized all the way up to, you know, until people told them they had to stop. You know,
Man. Wow.
so
I know that there's
something to it, but those old games are merciless.
Oh, they are. There's tricks to it. Like with the patterns, if you let a certain ship go, then you suddenly have like infinite bullets or something like that. There's tricks you can do too, you know?
There's tricks to it. Tricks I
Yeah.
never learned. I always tried to do it on instinct alone,
Yeah.
and that only goes so far once they make it fast.
I know. Yeah. My quarter, like I would look over the shoulder at dudes who are going 700,000-800,000 points at a single go, of course. And I just cannot understand the kind of like mental capacity you've got to have. Maybe it's no mental capacity. Maybe you.
I think it's a fugue state. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think they're so outside of it, you know.
Yeah. That might be it. Maybe I'm just too like self-aware or something. I don't know.
Well, and you get up high and you start to get nervous too. You're
Yeah.
like, today's the day. Today's the day I break
Yeah.
that score.
Yeah. And to tell you the truth, I say my high is 250, but if I get to 251, then I just start like doing whatever because I'm like, I don't care. I got the high score. And I'm not... But like you run, you know. Do you find you run better with people or without people?
Without people. Yeah.
Without people. Okay. All right.
Yeah.
You
I've
know,
tried doing it
yeah.
in packs before, and it's
Yeah.
for whatever reason, the isolation I think is one of the best parts.
Okay. All right. You know, I cycle and I've cycled with people and alone, and I cycle so much. I like cycling alone so much better, but I lollygag when I'm alone. You know, I'm like, I can just go up this hill at whatever speed I want to. But when I'm with people, then it's a challenge and I go faster. So I don't know if I'm better or worse. I don't know. Not good is what I am, not good. But cyclists, we don't get that runner's high that runners get, you know, or I don't think we do.
That thing is hard to get, by the way. I studied that because I wanted to achieve it when I was doing marathoning because marathoning sucks. It really hurts. And so I was like, well, if I can reach a state, you know, where it releases the endorphins or amines or whatever.
Yeah.
And I found out the one really interesting thing about that is that they had actually named the part of the brain that gets runner's high. They'd already named it the cannabinoid receptor because they discovered that it was stimulated by cannabinoids and THC.
Wow.
And it was only later that they figured out during a kind of anthropological study that it's actually, I forget, an amine or a hormone called anandine that's originally designed to reach that receptor during states where people were doing persistence hunting and hunting down prey for so long that they had to be able to mentally transcend through that pain and the dehydration so they could get to their prey. And so you were actually getting high so you could run just long enough to survive and find your next meal.
Yeah. You've
when
written
you
about
do get that, it's a glide, you know?
Yeah, you've written about persistence hunting in one of your stories. Is it the judge's story? Which one is it?
No, it's called persistence hunting.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. I like that a lot.
That's about a guy chasing away loneliness, though.
Yeah.
Which is different than food.
Well, you know about the persistence hunters and them disengaging into that runner's high. I've read anthropologists saying that they think that was one of the seeds of religion. That when you get to that state, you have like a numinous experience at that runner's high, and that we explain that to ourselves as a religious experience. You know? Yeah.
I saw something about a tribe near South America that actually had distance running built up as one of their religious ceremonies.
Oh, wow.
And they would carry an object or kick a rock. I couldn't remember, but I thought it was fascinating, you know, that they built that into it as a way of transcending.
Oh, kicking a rock. That's like hacky sacking, man. I could do that. I could do that for hours.
Rough on the toes. You got to build that up.
Yeah, I guess so, man. I guess so. You know, reading the Loop, when they go, if there's a cave in this story, and if anybody goes to it, I don't want to spoil anything, but if people go to a cave for any reason, and if there's a party, those people at the party were like every one of the people I went to high school with. It was really weird the way you knew who I knew somehow. I don't know.
Yeah,
I guess
no, those are there. People have been asking me actually. People from Bend, Oregon, which is the
yeah,
kind of what
yeah,
Turner Falls is based on, and that cave's a
yeah.
real cave system.
Uh-huh.
People have been writing me recently asking, is this character so and so, or did you really see this guy kick a cat to death,
Yeah,
or
yeah.
there's been all these questions, but really all the characters are kind of amalgams of different people I knew, just enough to not get sued or
Yeah.
get run out of town if I ever try to go do a reading there. But
Yeah, for sure. Well, your amalgamations are all the people I was in woodshop with in my junior year.
yeah, when you do coming of age, you try to stick to those kind of universal experiences, and now if I hear from people that are teenagers now and they're like, this is pretty legit, that's
Oh,
super heartening, because I was afraid I was going to be one of those old
yeah,
guys trying to,
yeah,
hello fellow kids,
yeah,
how are you doing
exactly.
on skateboarding,
I know. Like we can update Zeppelin to whatever the current band is, but that doesn't mean the dynamic stayed the same,
right,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Oh wow, man. That would be most heartening to have a young person tell you that you got it right. I've had young people tell me I got stuff wrong in my novels, like texts. I don't know what they're called, texting. I've had kids tell me that I don't really understand how kids text.
right, yeah. So it's 6:40. I think we're supposed to kick it over to Q&A if that's an option.
Yeah, that's great. Cool. Rachel.
Yeah. Well, this was a very well-timed event with Halloween coming up. We've got 2 thrillers here. So this first question comes from John Wolf. He asks, Jeremy, do you intend to carve that pumpkin?
My son intends to carve that pumpkin. It's going to be his design, but absolutely, we were just waiting until, you get excited and you go in early, and then it's like a collapsed face, pumpkin a couple days later. And the fruit flies are really bad right now, so we're going to wait until it's closer to I don't know, displaying it for all the kids that won't be walking by this Halloween. I don't know, but yeah, we're gonna get it carved up pretty soon. Yeah.
I never can carve well because I get grossed out by all the pulp and seeds inside. Man, I can deal with it after that stuff's gone, but that grosses me out completely, man.
I think it's great that you can write thrillers and like horror. Get the pulp, the pumpkin pulp. It's
Yeah. Well,
too much.
Bell peppers gross me out too. If somebody cuts a bell pepper and I'm around, I have to like slowly go to the other room because I don't like that look at all.
Well, going onto the books, Jeremy sort of touched on this earlier in terms of writing Lucy. But Ted asks, both of your heroes are young women. How and why did you decide to write from this position?
First, hey Ted, it's good to see you, man. It's good to like hear your name, anyways. And I'll see you soon, I hope. I guess I'll jump on it, Jeremy. Cool.
Yeah.
The reason I wrote a young woman is because I was doing a slasher and I knew I had to have a final girl. And I mean, you can have final boys as final girls, but the guys were the victims in my slasher, and so that dynamic kind of told me I had to have a final girl to stand up against the spirit of vengeance, who is herself female. And yeah, so it had to be a young girl, a final girl for me.
For me, it was, one, just having that as that source of inspiration, and then 2, I'd just written two books where the primary character was a concerned father. And so I didn't want to become the dad horror guy. I was like, if I do one more dad horror book, I'm going to get branded. So for me, I was really interested in also just, telling a coming of age story and talking about, being young and facing those challenges, and read The Outsiders and was reading, kind of different old school YA and thinking in terms of that, but really wanted to do a protagonist that I felt would be more challenging for me, where I would have to be more thoughtful, and I would have to, talk to the women in my life about their experiences of being young, and really be open and listen to that and try and you do it right to honor that experience. So it was something that I took seriously, and also did just because, like I said, I didn't want to be the dad horror guy. I got another one of those coming. So dad horror is it's me channeling, my own existence. But here I wanted to really get into a different character and let her exist as her whole own person outside of my neuroses and all that. So.
But there are a lot of dads. There's a lot of dads here, though, in your book.
Yeah. It's true.
I feel like dad horror for you is trying to figure out this pumpkin carving timing.
Yep. That's part of dad life for sure.
Well, this next question comes from Tracy. She says, both of your books have taken off amidst the whirlwind of 2020. Why do you think your books have resonated with readers in spite of everything?
You can go, Jeremy, since it's such an easy question.
I mean, if anything, I was super paranoid about it before it came out, but it feels like it's resonating because of everything. You know, it's just really bizarre timing. You know, I started it back in 2014, and you know, if you would have told me that Elon Musk is working on putting biotech implants into pig brains, and a company named Oracle is monitoring fast track virus testing, and everything is aflame with conspiracy, and the government is awful, and class and race divisions are the worst they've ever been. I mean, it's just I don't know, the book, I was hoping it would be an absurd, over the top satire, and it turned out to just be kind of on the nose analysis of 2020. And people, rather than rejecting that as being too much of what they're already, you know, doom scrolling through every day, it's been, they've said it's been resonant for them and cathartic, kind of see the slightly worse version of our daily experience in the book. So I think that's why people are digging it, hopefully, you know.
Yeah, I think Jeremy's right. I would add that I think in these crazy times, like he's talking about, which who could have guessed this? Like when he and I were writing our books, we couldn't have guessed that 2020 was going to be like this. You know, if I would have guessed, we'd have like jetpacks or something, and I would be so wrong. You know, I think that horror is appealing to the audience right now, or the world. I don't know, whoever reads stuff. I mean, it does reflect our fears and anxieties back to us. But more than that, I think horror, processing through a horror novel, a horror story, a horror movie, allows you to enter the terrible stuff, get all shrieky and bloody and gory with it, and then come out the other side. And I think it's that coming out the other side, whether it's a win or a loss, it ends. That tells anybody engaging that story that this too will end. You know, 2020 has to go over at some point, and hopefully 2021 is not just 2020 part 2. You know, that's going to be kind of a bummer. But I think the horror novel right now is like a dark tunnel you run through at a carnival just to get to the light at the other end and the cotton candy, and it makes us feel good to know that there's some light down there.
Hopefully there's some light at the end of this year.
Yeah.
Well,
hopefully it's not like the world burning or something.
clean slate.
Yeah.
Well, anonymous attendee asks, what is the most important part of building a dark atmosphere to you?
Dread and uncertainty. I guess uncertainty is part of dread. Yeah, like on the page, dread for a horror writer is one of the most important tools you got, one of the best techniques you can utilize. You don't have many jump scares because the reader controls the pace. So if they sense something about to jack in the box up around the corner, they just close the book and go get a glass of tea or something. And then they come back and the tension has been reset and they can face that jack in the box. But dread is that long, slow on-ramp to the terror. And I think that's the most important thing. Dread, and I keep wanting to say uncertainty. Maybe I should say paranoia. You know, I think paranoia is something you can really twist in a horror novel effectively.
Yeah, I'd just echo, especially for me, it's the uncertainty part. Like one of my favorite writers of all time, Brian Evanson, I went through trying to break down how he does what he does one time with a highlighter, because, you know, I was just like mystified as to why his stuff was doing what it was doing in my brain. And I realized that he writes the word maybe in his stories more than any other person I've ever read. And I was like, okay, those persistent maybes, that constant sense of being unsettled and that feeling of not knowing, makes it so that whatever happens next is even eerier. And also, just to, you know, take a point from Stephen's book, like there's there's these builds, you know, in Lewis's section, and then in Gabe and Cass's section, there's these kind of long character-based builds where it's growing and you're seeing them become more and more worried, and you know, as the reader, how present the threat is, and that, you know, it's out there hovering, making Jason noises in the woods, but they're not with you, you know. And so watching that threat grow with them being unaware of it, the suspense of that is significant. And then also that feeling of once the first thing goes wrong, knowing how much more wrong everything can become, especially once, you know, when you're reading The Only Good Indians, after the first set of things go wrong, you know you are unsafe, because they go so wrong in Lewis's case. You know, for the rest of the book, there's no safe space for you to go to. Whatever it's being built to, you should be afraid of, and you will not expect. So I think that having that build is super important, and not letting anything be certain. Like, the more rote and the more things are playing along the lines of traditional tropes, the less you're going to feel it, you know, because then you're going through the motions of horror product, you know.
Jeremy, I think you sort of touched on this a little bit earlier, but we are in Portland. So Sarah asks, Jeremy, can you talk about the relationship of your hometown to the book?
Oh my gosh. Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, the loop is, you know, it's kind of an outbreak story. It's a zombie outbreak book, but it's also this hyper angry, almost polemic, against class systems and against othering and against capitalism and against government oversight. And, you know, there's certainly a vein of that vibe here in Portland right now. There's definitely a sense that what we have right now is a system that cannot stand and that inherently brutalizes people, and that they want us divided, and they want all of us turned against each other so that people in power can remain in power. And I think that's kind of one of the central realizations of the loop, is just that, you know, when you're in a situation where there's a kind of, you know, a fascist power, the only language they speak is violence. And it's almost a tragedy that the violence is what you have. It's the only way you can communicate with them in response. It's the way they speak culturally. It's the language they understand. And how good people sometimes find themselves forced into, you know, positions of high conflict. So that's definitely a vibe in Portland right now. And also just, you know, the everything I do is infected with Portland just because of what a strong writers community it is here. And there's a sensation when you move here that you need to be creative and almost to honor the city, you know, to be worth like walking into the Powells and looking around. And there's a sense as a creative person that you need to respect Portland by doing your best and being creative. So it influences me in every way, you know?
You know, to add on to one thing Jeremy said there, since this question is about Portland and I don't live there, yeah, you don't negotiate with monsters. You only talk to monsters with force, you know, and sometimes that's all there is.
Well, this question's for both of you. It comes from Paul. In what ways do you want to challenge your readers with your work, or is that even important to you as a storyteller?
You know, I always want to challenge, like, yeah, there's a type of revulsion you can do on the horror page, which makes somebody gag, and that kind of launches the story into a horror space, and that's a wonderful place to be. You have to do that, of course. Gore and that kind of provoking that kind of visceral response is very important for horror, but an even more fundamental and scarier thing to provoke is moral revulsion. You know, like if you have, like Jack Ketchum was the best at this we've probably had. You know, you could read his stuff and you almost become complicit in the decisions the characters are making, and you exit that story, that novel, that book, feeling kind of compromised and dirty, you know. And that's a wonderful thing to do to the reader, to challenge them in that way, because otherwise people will click along thinking, I'm good, I'm great, but horror can remind them that maybe they're not.
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't necessarily ever go in with the intent to challenge. I don't usually go in. I try not to think about the reader during the writing process itself that much. Obviously, in post, during editing, and obviously during marketing, the reader plays a part in that relationship. But usually I'm trying to challenge myself, where I'm willing to go with the fiction, what I'm willing to write about, how true I can be with what I'm trying to communicate. And so I know that if I'm challenging myself, I know, for example, if there's a scene that I'm hesitant to write and I break out into a sweat when I'm writing it, I know that's going to affect the reader. I know there's something to that, because if it had that effect on me just generating it, there's going to be something resonant and true or dark or confrontational about that is also going to reach through to the reader. But I also like to challenge people to have fun with books too, and which is a weird thing to say, but also just with the loop, I wanted to write something that made me feel the same way I felt reading Books of Blood or Joe Lansdale or Michael Crichton books, under the covers with the paperback and the flashlight and the Walkman on at 3 a.m. I wanted to it was a different mission, to write something that would be confrontational and very, very dark, but would also pull people through like a thriller. And trying to do that kind of craftsmanship is a whole different thing I'd never tried before. And it's actually kind of fun, to see if you can get yourself excited about what's going on the page. Hopefully people dig it out there too,
Yeah, I was describing your book to someone, Jeremy, and the way I always describe your novel, I would not call it young adult, but the way I describe young adult is it's an adult novel with all the boring stuff taken out. But I realized when I read The Loop that you did an adult novel with all the boring stuff taken out, it just moves and moves and moves. Like I never have to slow down and watch somebody think about stuff, which is so boring. There's stuff happening and going and running, and it's just so pleasant. And you're right, it is a read under the bed covers with a flashlight kind of book,
And I also wanted to do a Peter Benchley style biotech drop. I like doing a lot of research, because then you don't actually have to work on writing. So I did a lot of research about biotech and octopuses and stuff like that. And I always remember as a kid reading Jaws or Beast and stuff like that. And there'd be the plot, and then he'd stop and he'd be like, here's 3 pages of weird science.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah, but that's how I learned about the bends, was from Peter Benchley,
Yeah.
Well, we have time for one more question. And this one comes from Christina. And they say 2020 is coming to a close, and I have to know, what was your favorite book that came out this year? And it can be any genre.
I'll go first.
We should not say each other's. We should not say each other's, because we'll just say each other's, and then we'll be fun, right?
No, for me, let's see. That is a tough call. It's kind of a tie for me. There's two that do very different things. So I would say the two that completely knocked me sideways and had me in different worlds were The Boatman's Daughter by Andy Davidson, and then The Only Good Indians, which I think is just a singular novel. There's nothing else that quite moves or works like that. And so those are the two I can't stop talking about this year.
Thank you. I'll do also two that came out super recently. One of them being Jeremy's The Loop, of course, because it's a book I'll go back to. I kind of want to listen to it on audio too. I wonder what it sounds like on audio.
It sounds good.
It does. Yeah. Nice. And also Rebecca Roanhorse's Black Sun, which just came out last week, and it's a second world fantasy that just flat blows me away. It makes me realize most fundamentally that I'm not a fantasy writer, because I could never do anything even close to what she does, but I am so impressed by it.
Oh, thank you. We also just hosted Rebecca last week. So if you want to catch up on that event, it's available on our YouTube channel. Also, if you missed any of these recommendations, if you just want to watch this again, if you have a friend that wants to watch it again in daylight, it will be available on our YouTube channel tomorrow. Well, thank you so much for joining us for tonight's event. It was such a pleasure to host Steve and Jeremy, and welcome all of you. Please consider purchasing a copy of their new books by visiting us at powells.com. And while you're there, please be sure to check out our lineup of other upcoming virtual events. And we look forward to seeing you at another one of our events again soon. Take care until then.
Thanks for having us.